Awesome. Hi everybody, thank you for coming. There is going to be a significant portion of this talking about the journey across Mexico, but to start it off, it's not just going to be about that. It's going to be kind of my journey of getting into taking pictures and a few of the things I've done along that journey, and then ending with that trip across Mexico. So once again, thanks all for coming, and I hope you enjoy. I'm excited. So to start, we're going to go back to 2016 when I was 17 years old, and I had just gotten my first job at this lovely, world-renowned establishment. Some of you may know. It's the Spryfield Tim Hortons. And I was in grade 11 and working there for a few months at this time. And as someone in grade 11, you start making your first money, and it's like, it's time to, you have a few $100s saved up. It's like, it's time to make the first big purchase of your life, really. And I don't know if it's the same these days, but in grade 11, in my experience at JL Ilsley, if you had an Android phone, you were kind of a social outcast. So I had an Android phone, and I really wanted to improve my social status and have my text messages get sent through and appear on other people's phones as blue instead of green, because that was a sign of being up here, and I was down there. So of course in high school, that's what you care about. You care about your social position. And I'm like, I've got $400 saved up. It's time to buy an iPhone. And I was pretty committed to that. I was excited. And the day came when I was saved up enough tips from Tim Hortons, and I was gonna make the big purchase. And I decided I was gonna look on Kijiji and see what else I could buy with $300. And there's a few interesting things. There's like a pretty nice wheelbarrow and like a cool blender that also had the ability to make soups as well as smoothies. And there was also a Nikon D3200, and for some reason I thought, I'd never been interested in photography, first of all, and second of all, I just thought that a nice camera would be way more than $250. But when I saw this camera listed, it kind of intrigued me, and I looked up other Nikon D3200s. They were like $300. So I was like, this one's $250. If I offer it $225, I could get it. If I don't like it, I'll sell it and make $75. It's a profitable venture. But I ended up changing my mind, buying that Nikon instead of an iPhone. And that's kind of how I took that step. It was kind of something I never really had planned, but it felt right. So I did that. And over the next few years, we're not on that picture yet. So I took the camera home, and I was pretty excited to test it out because it's like this new device that you never use. It's got all these cool settings, and the obvious place to go around here was Crystal Crescent Beach to test it out. So I went with my mom and dad. Hey, Dad. And I was feeling ambitious, so I was like, I've seen these pictures, these long exposure photos where there's water crashing over the rocks and it makes this beautiful silky water effect. And this is I'd never taken a picture on the camera yet. And I was like, my parents were walking up ahead, and I was like, this is gonna be so cool. And I took a picture, and the picture just came out as white. And I was like, I probably should have checked if the camera worked when I handed over my money to this woman. And my heart started racing. I was like, I'm gonna have to tell my parents that I'm an idiot and I don't know who that person is I just bought it from. She probably stole it, or it was just broken, and this is kind of what I felt like at that time. So after a few minutes of fiddling with it, I didn't give up right away. I thought it was broken, but it turns out I just had to twist the knob from M to A because it was on manual, and the photos were all just overexposed, and I had no idea what that meant. But it turned out that the automatic setting allowed me to take pictures. So that was kind of where I started, really not having any idea what I was doing. And a few minutes later, that was one of the first photos I took ever on a camera. So that's way back in June of 2016. And then over the following months, over the following years even, the camera for me became something that took me outside. At this time in high school, my favorite thing to do was play FIFA in the basement, so I wasn't really, with Adam right there, shout out to Adam. I wasn't really spending all that much time outside, and like Sambro is such an area with natural beauty and character that it wasn't really until I got the camera and started spending my afternoons looking for new trails and things to photograph, and the evenings searching for sunsets, that I kind of started appreciating where I was from. So those first few years, that's what the camera was for me. It was just kind of a way to look at the finer details of the area and really take an appreciation for where I'd grown up my whole life and hadn't been able to truly appreciate. And these are some of those photos from that first year. And now, that's really all it was. I had no ambitions with the camera. I had never printed anything. It was just something that got me outside and that brought me joy. And for me, that was fun. And then I'm gonna flash forward to about 4 years after I bought the first camera. And it's now COVID, we're in 2020. It's about October of 2020. And being a university student at this time, I was saving I still live in Sambro, so I was saving 2 hours every day from not having to drive to Dalhousie and drive all the way home at peak rush hour. And of course, with an extra 2 hours every day being a university student, I was capitalizing and getting a lot more sleep. And also, at the same time, trying to do some new things, because it's okay, I've got more time, I'm living in the basement. School has all of a sudden become not really school because it's all online. So why not try out some new hobbies? And I was really struggling due to the online lecture system that university had transformed into. It was a really difficult thing to focus the whole lecture. And I'd heard things about meditation being great for improving your focus and bringing a sense of calm into your life. So I was like, how hard can it be to sit down for 10 minutes every day and just focus on your breath? And if anyone in here has tried to meditate, has anyone in here tried to meditate before? Yeah, a few people. It's not as easy as it sounds, is it? It's you sit down, it's okay, how hard can it be to focus on my breath for 10 minutes? And just focus on my breath. And then next thing you know, you're thinking of that kid in 3rd grade who you made fun of his shirt and I was probably planning some way to kill you in your sleep. And it's and then you finish, the 10 minutes is up and all of a sudden you're like, I took one breath and then what happened? But anyway, that's a bit of a tangent, but back to where we're at, October 17th, 2020. And this day I sit down to do my meditation. I'm about 3 months into trying to meditate and haven't really made any ground with it. But this time, the mind is pretty calm. It's like a lake on a calm day where there's just a clear reflection, there's no ripples. And then as I'm sitting there kind of enjoying this state, but also just kind of existing in it, there's a splash. And all of a sudden there's a rock in the lake. And that rock is an idea that just kind of flew into my brain from the cosmos. And that idea was to take the experience I had accumulated over the past 4 years of exploring Sambro on foot and by car and taking pictures of everything and putting that into some sort of physical project that I could share with people. And it was really weird because it was literally like that, it was a calm lake and all of a sudden, splash, there's an idea. And it was the idea came in full start to finish format. As soon as I got out of the meditation, I got up and I wrote down as much as I could to kind of have as a blueprint for this idea. And over the next few weeks, I spent every afternoon just kind of going out into Sambro and capturing the community really as it was. I wasn't trying to capture any specific beauty. I wasn't going after sunsets. I was mainly going out on days that were gray and foggy. I wanted it to be the most accurate representation of the community. Yeah, a lot of fog. So, and believe it or not, there was actually a day where it was sunny out, and I was like, I'm not going to go out today because it's not realistic enough. So that was how I spent the end of October 2020 and the beginning of November, just trying to essentially go through this list of ideas that I had and capture as many photos as I could. And that became the first book project that I ever created, which was Sambro, the Ocean Playground's Ocean Playground. And it was a really, I've never, since then and before then, I've never really had a creative experience like that, where it's the whole thing comes to you and it seems crystal clear what you're doing, and there's no real planning before or during. It's just the process is there and you just have to go through with the motion. And as I was creating the book, I was monitoring the Facebook group on the Sambro Facebook group because that's where I was going to market it in. And I saw that the school where I went to school, Sambro Elementary, was raising money for their new playground. And it resonated with me a lot because that playground A is where every year of my life from like 5 to 12, I played soccer every single day, and it's where I developed a love of soccer that I still have. Unfortunately, today we saw Canada lose their last game of the World Cup, but you know, it was good to see. And I also met like some of my best friends on that playground, one of which is Tormod, who's over there. And yeah, so it was a special place for me, and I thought that since this project was like for the community, and it was like something that came to me because of the time I'd spent taking photos in the community, that it can also help out that cause. And I was really expecting like maybe 20 or 30 copies would sell. It would raise a few $100s for the playground. It might be kind of cool. And then I decided to make the post when the book was coming along. It was pretty much ready to be printed. And I was pretty blown away because within about a week, 250 books had sold. And it ended up raising almost $2,000 for that playground that I spent so much time on as a kid. And it really, like, it was pretty magical because I had no expectations. I was just, like I said, going through the motions of this thing that came to me. And then to see the type of impact that art oriented around the community, done for the community, kind of with a community could do, and how much momentum and energy it could pick up from like, someone's buying this, they're not just buying it to support me, they're buying it because maybe 20 years from now, their kid will see it and they'll look through and see Sambro as it was in 2020, and also knowing that it's going to go back in some way to the community. So that was a really cool project, and I wanted to share a little bit about that. And we're not there yet either, but I'm a little ambitious with the clicker. So that was the end of 2020, and then the new year started, 2021, and I felt like I had a lot of momentum from this project, and then I was starting the last semester of my undergrad degree, and all the momentum kind of just was gone as soon as January rolled around. Like, I don't know if anyone else has experienced this when they're working on some goal, some big project, but then when it finally is done, you get to the other side and all of a sudden it's like, what now? And then that compounded with online school and sitting in a basement every day, some other personal things in life. And it was like a really tough time to know that I had 4 months left in my degree. At this stage in my life, my goal for after my degree was not to get a job, but to go traveling around South America. And we were in the middle of a pandemic, so that wasn't really a possibility for me. So it was just kind of this state of limbo of knowing I had a lot of work to do to get to the next goal, which was finishing my degree, but not really having anything to look forward to or accomplish after that. And then in February, I was at my friend Eric's house, and Eric can't be here tonight, unfortunately, but I was at Eric's house, and his brother came home, who I'd never really met before, and he was quite intoxicated. And he started going on a rant about how that spring, he was going to be leading a group of people tree planting in Antigonish. And he was trying to rope me and Tormod into coming tree planting with him, which like really didn't make any sense because you're getting paid 8 cents a tree, and I was just about to finish my undergrad degree in marketing, which I could have gotten a job getting paid more than 8 cents a tree. And it also sounds like a horrible job where you're destroying yourself physically and you're alone in the woods every day, which has its good parts, but it also is scary. And despite having some better options as far as maybe calculated options and logical options, Connor's offer really enticed me. And I decided to commit to going tree planting as soon as I finished my undergrad. And that was also really scary because it sounds like when I was leading up to it, I was doing research, and it just sounded like the most physically daunting thing because you're just alone, bending over, planting trees, slogging through the woods every day, all day, with a lot of bugs. And like, you may think the physical part's hard, but it's really the bugs. But anyway, I decided to do that. So there's a picture of me on the right, and there's Connor in the middle, and that was our tree planting crew. And over 10 weeks, I planted 69,000 trees with my own hands, which is kind of cool. It's a lot of trees. But more importantly for me, this 3 months spent in the woods with this weird group of people was like a buffer. It was a buffer between a goal that I had and didn't know what was going to come after, which was finishing my undergrad, and then kind of whatever came after my undergrad. And I didn't want to go into a job with my degree because it was scary. There was comfort there. I would have to put my dreams of travel kind of on the back burner, and I was intimidated by that because I kind of was like, if I get that job, then I will just stay at that job and then I won't travel South America. So tree planting was the perfect thing for me to kind of have time alone and really figure out what I wanted to do next. And yeah, so let me see, am I going ahead too quick? I am. During this time, also while I was tree planting and thinking about what I wanted to do next, I decided that after tree planting, I was gonna try and do strictly photography as a way to make money. And once again, this was scary to me because I had done the book project, which was on the side just while I was in school, and that was pretty much the only kind of type of photography I had done to make any money. And I didn't really know how I was going to do it when I came back, but I was committed to doing that and making my living through taking photos. So that summer when I went home, I made another book, which was Letters from Spryfield, and I also sold some prints of my photos, and like Kim mentioned, I made the calendar for Sambro and Ketch Harbor. And it surprised me that it was a lot of work to do something you love and make that how you make money. But it really is. And it was a big learning lesson, but I was really happy because this allowed me to have the flexibility of my time to think about how I was going to actually end up accomplishing my goal of travel. I was doing something I enjoyed, and I was really grateful that through these 3 projects, through selling prints and the calendar and the Spryfield photo book, another $2,000 were raised for local charities, which was awesome. But then I wanted to travel, and I needed to commit to that, and I hadn't yet. I'd committed in my head, but there was no pen on paper, there was no skin in the game. And after doing some of these projects and saving up a little bit of the money, I was ready to buy my ticket to Bogota, Colombia. And you might be thinking, Bogota, Colombia, but I thought you went to Mexico. Just wait. So I sat down, and I'm looking at flights to Bogota, Colombia, and to this point, I hadn't truly imagined what it would be like to go to a place alone, having never traveled before, where you don't speak the language. And I really got hit with a lot of fear. And it felt like I had jumped into a deep end of a pool, and I didn't know how to swim, and I didn't have water wings, and I was just flapping about. And that was before I did anything. I was just looking at flights, and I was like, should I listen to my instincts here? So actually within about an hour of feeling that fear and feeling that anxiety about, damn, maybe going to Colombia is too much for me and biting off more than I can chew, I said screw it, and I bought a ticket to Mexico because that felt like a softer landing. It felt like the right choice to me. It still checked off all the boxes. I wanted to study Spanish, I wanted somewhere warm, and I wanted to get away. And so that day, I bought my ticket to Mexico. And this is a photo that a friend of mine leading up to Mexico drew for me, Dante, who also unfortunately isn't here tonight, but he is in spirit. And it was interesting because he had drawn it a few months before and said he wasn't going to do anything with it, and then as my trip was building up, he gave it to me, and it really kind of accurately described how I felt. There was a lot of fear still, even though I felt like I made the right choice by not going to Colombia and going to Mexico instead. There was just this kind of huge, vast unknown before me, and there was a lot of fear regarding that, a lot of excitement as well, but a lot of kind of just uncertainty, and uncertainty is pretty scary. But I ended up taking this picture with me when I went to Mexico, and I kept it folded up in with my passport the whole time, so it gave me some comfort. But then, at this point, I had committed. I bought my ticket, and I was off to Mexico, and that is then where I went. And I had a one-way ticket, and it was an unforeseen amount of time. I had some friends, Tormod and Addy and Eric, who had told me they were going to be coming down to visit at some point, but we're 22 years old. I was like, they probably won't end up coming to visit. I'm going to be on my own this whole time. And I also had my parents come to visit, which was really cool too. But about 4 weeks into this trip, Tormod and Addy over there, hi Tormod and Addy, they came down to visit, And we had like an amazing 2 weeks of experience. We went to Chichen Itza, which is one of the 7 wonders of the world, and just this like mind-blowing structure that the Mayans built and used as a place of worship, a place of sacrifice, a place of game. They played their famous game where they hit the ball through the hoop with their hip. Really cool stuff. We did that. We went swimming in these holes that are sinkholes in the earth that are all over this region of Mexico, and they're actually caused by the meteor that extincted the dinosaurs, so that's pretty amazing. That's Torma there, being a badass climbing a rock. And, oh, not on that slide yet. We also went scuba diving, and for me, scuba diving is something I got certified last summer, so just before this trip, but it had been something that always terrified me because the ocean, having grown up right next to it, has always been like a top 2, top 1 type of fear. Seeing the kind of chaos that it can cause, which you'd think growing up next to the ocean, you have this nice, like, the ocean's amazing, don't get me wrong, it's amazing living next to it, but it's also a scary place and has a lot of power. And scuba diving was something that terrified me. I got my certification, and then we were going scuba diving in Mexico on the 2nd biggest reef in the world in Cozumel. And our first dive, I had a slightly malfunctioning mouthpiece, so we were down at the bottom of the ocean diving, as you do, and little drops of ocean water are coming through my mouthpiece. And it wasn't going to kill me, but it was pretty terrifying, and it made me feel quite anxious. And it didn't leave, after that dive, I didn't come away feeling super confident about my diving because of the drips coming through my mouthpiece. And it felt like the whole time I was down there, my breaths weren't coming in quite full enough because of that malfunctioning mouthpiece. And a few days after our first dive, we had planned a night dive, which, does a night dive sound kind of scary to anybody? Yeah. Because along with my fear of the ocean, when I was younger, and kind of a little bit now, but I won't actually admit it, I also have a bit of a fear of the dark. So it's like taking your 2 biggest fears and putting them into one, and also coming off of a not so great diving experience and having the anxiety from that. And in my head, I was kind of freaking out. And Torma probably doesn't even know this, because in my head I was like, they can't know, like I'm gonna still do this. But I was really doubting whether I was gonna do this night dive. And we ended up doing it, and we went out, and it was amazing because I told the instructor that I was feeling anxious and kind of like about how that first dive, he was reassuring me that the mouthpiece is fine, like you have a different one this time. And he was saying when you get in the water, just float back, don't go under right away, just let yourself float and tell yourself, I'm in the water by my own choice, I'm here to explore, I'm safe. And before I hadn't done that, I went straight down. So we get in the water, it's dark out, the moon is shining on the water, it's a beautiful night, and I'm floating there, and I'm just telling myself, while everyone else is descending, I'm like, I'm here to explore, I'm safe, the ocean is mine to conquer. And it actually kind of worked, and I was feeling calm. Until I started going down, and it's pitch black because it's the ocean and it's night. But you have a flashlight, and it was interesting because there was about 6 or 7 of us on the dive, and with all the beams of light shining around under the water, it was not as scary as it actually sounds. The anxiety kind of melted away. And it was a fantastic experience. It felt like we're floating through space while we're swimming. There's stingrays, there's amazing coral. And as the dive's going on, I'm kind of up ahead of the pack, and I'm looking in all the coral. We're looking for reef sharks, which it sounds silly to seek out a shark, but that's kind of like, we'd seen a lot of cool animals on our previous dives, and I wanted to see a shark. So I was like looking under the caves and looking over here. And there's one that caught my eye, and it was a little strand sticking out from a piece of coral. And I was looking at it, and I thought it might have just been a sea anemone sticking out. And then I turned over and looked in the cave, and there's an octopus just looking at me. And the octopus, intrigued by my light or my face or something, comes out of his little hole and starts like octopi, 8-legged, walking along the coral. And I'm sitting there like in shock, and I'm trying to signal everyone to come over. I'm freaking out. I'm like yelling into my respirator, and like just like, yeah. Oh, I have a picture of an octopus. This isn't my photo, by the way, but that's what it looked like. This is at Cozumel. And like just sitting there, shining your light on it, you could see it change its colors as it was walking along, and it was just the most alien, like mind-blowing experience that you can imagine. And a few minutes after spending the time with the octopus, Eric and I ran out of air, so we ascended to the surface, and we were in this kind of glow, this excited haze from having that experience that was so surreal. And we were under the full moon when we got to the surface, and I was just like hit with this sensation of like, I am so happy that I didn't skip this dive because I was so scared. Because if I had stayed at home and Tormod and Eric came back and told me about this experience diving with an alien and how cool it was, I would have been so upset. So that was a really cool experience early on in the trip. And after that, Tormod and Eric and Addie headed back home, and I headed westwards. And oh, there's me after the dive. So happy, not scared at all. So I headed westwards, and this is a picture from the town of San Cristobal, which is located in the poorest state of Mexico. Mexico is made up of, I want to say 27, but I don't know exactly, 27 states. And this is in the Chiapas state. And there's a really cool woman who I met just before going to Mexico. And while I was in Mexico, she was in Chile. And destiny brought her away from Chile because of political tensions there. And that's this woman over here. Anyway, so she was in Chile, and she wanted to leave because things were scary, and she got robbed twice, and it was a good time for her, but a scary time. And instead of coming home, she was determined to continue traveling, and she ended up coming to Mexico as well. So we met up, and we came to San Cristobal together. And we also, along with the experiences I shared with Tormod and Addie, had some really cool travel experiences. And I'm going to kind of walk you through just one day that we shared together that was like, out of the 100 days I spent in Mexico, probably number one in terms of like experience that filled that day. So we were sleeping at a hostel, which is like a room with a bunch of bunk beds, and everyone there is traveling around. And we got up in the morning, and we climbed a hill where there's a church, and this was the sunrise view over San Cristobal. You can see some churches and around there. And it was just serene. Like we were just standing there, there's people out for their morning run, all these locals, and we just sat there as the sun's rays were shining over the mountain and waking the town up. And it was just like a really, really phenomenal start to what was going to be a really incredible day. And after that, we headed to the markets and we did some exploring. There's lots of cool fabrics in this region, so you can see, kind of get a little idea here. Here's some earrings, but it's just filled with clothes and kids running around playing. Probably the coolest markets I went to in Mexico. And that afternoon, our plan was to go to this town. And this town is called San Juan de Chamula. It was about a 20-minute bus ride away from where we were staying in San Cristobal. And this town is pretty much like 100% indigenous Mexican folk. They are, what is the name of the indigenous folk there? Eleanor, do you remember?
I want to say Zapotec, but that's wrong.
Okay, maybe Zapotec, but regardless. We went here kind of specifically for this church, also to just see what the culture there was like, because it's quite different. And we were greeted into this church where the locals, the floor is all pine needles, and they clear off a seat on the floor. There's no pews or anything, and they light candles. The kids eat candy, and we were greeted with a shot of the local liquor, which is called posh, which is a mixture of corn and sugar alcohol. And I've never, probably ever in Mexico, this is the place I felt the most like out of place. Like I was like, but then they give you a shot of alcohol, and you're like, okay, they don't not want me here. They're inviting me in. And interestingly enough, after the shot of posh, they also give you a shot of Coca-Cola, which is kind of a beverage that they worship down here. And you think it might just be to chase your shot of alcohol. You're like, oh, I didn't know they did it like that down here. But it's actually, we've all drinking Coca-Cola. It's fizzy and it makes you burp. And that's why they drink Coca-Cola, so that they burp. And in their eyes, burping is getting rid of bad energy. So we're in this church. There's pine needles everywhere. They're clearing their space. They're putting candles up. We're burping because of our Coca-Cola. And all the families who are there to do their ceremony have come in, and they're sitting down, and they all have a live chicken with them. And it's interesting because we're observing, and they take this live chicken, and typically it's one family per altar that they make with the candles, and they usually rub the chicken on one member of their family, which is a way to kind of get bad energy out of that person, or sickness, or maybe someone put a curse on them and they're trying to get it out with the chicken. and they move the chicken above the flames while the chicken's still alive and knows what's going on, and then they break the chicken's neck. And it's a pretty wild, pretty different from North America, well, different from Canada, I should say. Mexico is North America. Different from Canada experience that I've ever had, as far as like exposure to a different practice and different culture. And we stayed there for about an hour, just kind of sitting cross-legged, like not talking at all, just observing. And we saw 3 chickens get sacrificed. I was a little tipsy by the time I left because this man kept giving me shots of the alcohol. And yeah, that was the afternoon of this day, which was pretty wild. And in the evening, we went out and we were invited to this Mexican dance ceremony, which had a indigenous Peruvian and indigenous Mexican musician, and they played music. And then this group of us danced all night, and then we sat around a bonfire at the end, chatting in Spanish with these musicians. And that was just one day of the travel. So that's just like a kind of snapshot into the sort of fullness of experience that we were having. And then there was a really interesting interaction that we had that's going to stick with me probably for the rest of my life, where, I'm just going to drink some water. Hold on, folks. So, it was on St. Patrick's Day of last year, actually this year. We're still in 2022, aren't we? And we were staying at a hostel that had an Irish guy staying there, so it was like St. Patrick's Day was being celebrated, which it doesn't often get celebrated in Mexico. So we were having a party, everyone was in green, someone was painting shamrocks on our faces, there was cranberries playing. It was a good time. And Eleanor and I had decided that we were gonna leave the party temporarily to go to the night market. This was one of our last nights in the town. And we wanted to buy some souvenirs to send to our friends and family back home. So we had been out at the night market, we bought our stuff, we bought a little obsidian sacrificial mine knife, and we bought a vest and some other cool things. But when we were coming back to our hostel, with our shamrocks painted on our face, a little kid stopped us, and he asked us, he was a Mexican kid, and he asked us what the shamrocks on our face were for. And the interesting thing about this region, because it's so poor, because it's the poorest region in Mexico, is that there's a lot of kids working on the street there, which is really sad to experience and sad to see. There's kids, you don't know if maybe their parents are sending them out and that's how the family makes money, or maybe the parents sold the kid and the kid is now working for someone. But these are kids as young as like 5 years old, 6 years old, working at 11, 12 at night, trying to sell bracelets or little jaguar statues to tourists. So it's really, like, it's heartbreaking to see, and you just don't know what, like, their actual life is like, if they're going to school, if they have anyone to support them, or if they're just, like, slave labor. It's heartbreaking. But this night, after we had purchased some things at the night market, this kid stopped us, and he asked us in English about what our shamrocks on our face were. And in Spanish, I tried to explain to him what St. Patrick's Day was, and I realized they probably don't have it here, so it's like I can say the words for it, but he won't understand what it is, so I just told him it's a celebration. And he asked us where we were from, once again, in kind of broken English. And I told him that we were from Canada, and then he asked what Canada was like. And I was telling him that it's cold, that it's really beautiful, but right now it's very, very cold, and that's why we're here. And it was just like, he was a very sweet boy, and it was just this really genuine interaction of this kid who was curious of why these white people were in his town, what brought us there, and what was it like where we were from, because he likely will never have the opportunity to leave where he's from. And he was selling bracelets. He was one of the kids who was working on the street, and he had like a sleeve full of bracelets that he was displaying to everybody. And I asked him at the end of our conversation how much were his bracelets, and he said it was 1 for 20 pesos or 3 for 20, or 1 for 10 or 3 for 20. So I told him I'd buy 3 bracelets for 20 pesos, which is equivalent to $1, so really not much. And I choose my 3 bracelets, and I'm getting out my 20 pesos, and then the kid hands me my 3 bracelets, and then he breaks off 2 more and he gives them to me. And I go to give him money, and he doesn't want the money, and he's just trying to give the bracelets to me purely out of the kindness of his heart, even though he's probably doesn't have anything. And it was just kind of the he felt like I had provided some value to him by taking the time to talk to him on the street and tell him about where I was from. And he wanted to repay that favor and give me some extra bracelets. And it was really like a magical moment of, this kid comes from nothing, and he might not know that I am from Canada and like have access to different resources than him and have access to a job where I can make more than 5 pesos for a bracelet. But he ended up eventually taking the extra money, but I still wear his bracelet around my ankle right here, and I hope it never falls off, but I'm sure eventually it will. But in the meantime, it's a pretty fantastic reminder of kind of like just, there's so much more that we can connect over and we can share positively than that we don't connect over. And it was, yeah, I'll never forget that kid and the bracelet that he sold me. So that's another cool story from Mexico. And Eleanor then unfortunately had to come back home after our time in San Cristobal, and I headed westward, and I went to this town, which was in the mountains of Oaxaca. I ended up doing mushrooms with a group of random people here. Crazy experience. I cried at this sunset, in fact. It was just a group of strangers. We'd all met that day, and this town, the mushrooms grow in the mountains, and that's what you do there. Everyone there, people as young as 5 years old there, have a mushroom ceremony, and it's just part of their culture. And that was another cool experience. I also went to this little coastal town called Chicagua, which has approximately 1,000 people. You can see along the beach there. That's pretty much the entire town. A lot of little shops. I rented a hammock on that beach for $3 a night, and that's where I learned to surf, which is another really special place in my heart. And after this town of 1,000 people, I made my way to Mexico City, which is a lot bigger than 1,000 people. It's actually 22 million people and one of the biggest cities in the planet. And this was the end of my trip. I had about a week left when I came here, and I was just trying to soak in as much culture as I possibly could, which involved going to some soccer games, going to the infamous Lucha Libre, and also what you'll see on the cover of my calendar from the trip, which was probably one of the coolest, probably the coolest overall experience of my life, which was taking a hot air balloon over an Aztec pyramid, the Pyramid of the Sun, Teotihuacan. And yeah, that was pretty much my trip through Mexico. And to end my presentation, to wrap it up, to put a conclusion on it, I just want to reflect and think back to what I talked about in the lecture, in the presentation, and some of the pivotal kind of decisions that were made, such as when I bought my first camera instead of buying that phone, when I decided to make that first project because that idea came to me, when I decided to go tree planting because I didn't know what else to do, and although it didn't make sense, I was kind of drawn towards it. And then also when I decided to change my ticket from Colombia to Mexico, just because it felt like the right thing to do. And all of that kind of came down to a feeling inside of me. Each of those things that came up, it was like an invisible string was pulling me towards one direction, even though before I might have been going this way. And I decided on all those occasions to trust that invisible string and let it pull me that direction. And I'm really, really grateful that I listened to my intuition on all those occasions, because a lot of these things I've shared with you are some of the most like fulfilling and proud experiences I've had in my life. And if I hadn't listened to that invisible string, if I bought an iPhone instead of a camera, or if I didn't go tree planting, I don't know what would happen, but I don't know if I would be here in front of you guys sharing this presentation today. So if there's anything you take away from this, I hope that next time you feel that little invisible string pulling at you towards something, even if it might not feel like the logical decision, sit down and listen to that and maybe see if it might be something, even if you're afraid of it. The best things in life are just on the other side of the comfort zone. So that's what I have for you. And I also, today, am selling calendars from the trip to Mexico. So those are up here, and they have 12 pictures from that journey across Mexico. And like Kim said, these are also in a fundraiser. So each calendar that's sold will provide a Mexican child with 9 breakfasts. and that's in San Luis Potosi, Mexico, through a charity called Nutriendo. So, yeah, that's my presentation. Thank you.